Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
From staffing cuts to shifting guidance, federal contracting offices are navigating a year-end landscape unlike any in recent memory. The ripple effects are hitting small businesses and big prime contractors alike. We get perspective from Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator, Emily Murphy. Emily, thanks for joining me.
It's always wonderful to be with you, Terry.
So I was thinking, it's literally just 1 week till the end of the fiscal year. As a former comptroller, this is the time when you get really antsy about pushing money out the door. From your perspective, what are you hearing? What's the mood in agency contracting shops and financial management shops right now this year?
So, as you can imagine, any fiscal year, you've got contracting officers working incredibly hard, staying late, working around the clock, trying to get money out the door. I still remember when I was the CAO at GSA back in the Bush administration, we would send contracts west over the course of the day to make sure that we got as much signed as we could. And this year, you've got almost a perfect storm of things. You've got a very compressed fiscal year. The full year CR wasn't even signed until March 15th. So you've got essentially 6 months in which the contracting officers had to do a full year's worth of work. You then have, on top of that, a very different set of oversight concerns that are happening. So you've got agency heads becoming much more involved in looking at acquisitions and wanting to review them. You've got a lot more political review of contract decisions that are going out the door, from the Department of Homeland Security, where the secretary is reviewing everything over $100,000, to the Hegseth memos that came out of DOD requiring reviews of contracts, GSA, others, the reduced use of purchase cards. So there's been a lot more work and a lot more process for contracting officers this year. And then there's a sense that maybe not spending all the money isn't the worst thing in the world, which is very different than in the past. In the past, you wanted to get every dime allocated before midnight. You wanted to make sure that you'd taken the money that Congress had entrusted to you and spent it the way that they told you to spend it. This year, there seems to be some back chatter that maybe if things lapse, or if things aren't spent, that maybe that's money that's saved. And that puts contracting at a really tough spot because they want to do right by the program offices that are their customers. They want to make sure that they obligate those funds the way that they've been instructed to do so, and they do right by the American people in doing so. But they also need to follow the rules that are being put in place by their leadership and make sure they're getting those reviews in place. So it's a lot more work in a very compressed time frame.
And what about the perspective of the contractors themselves? One of the other things you typically worry about at the end of the year is expiring funds. And we've heard a lot with all of these extra procedures and changes in policy, the government's a little behind on making its payments. And so how are contractors perceiving all of this uncertainty?
So contractors are nervous, and they're nervous, first of all, whether or not they're going to have work that would have in the past been routine to have an option exercised or an award made, if that's going to happen. If there's enough workforce to do it, if there is enough time left to do it, if the process still allows it to happen. So they're concerned about that, but they're also concerned that, there's no guarantee we're going to have a continuing resolution by September 30th. In fact, it's looking like there's going to be a shutdown. So if you're a contractor, getting funds on contract now is imperative, because otherwise they're looking at being unable to function at the beginning of the new fiscal year. They're already dealing with being behind in receiving payments that they had outstanding. So they're in a tough spot as well. And they're also facing a situation where they've been asked to make some pretty substantial discounts. And so they did that, and they're hoping that in consideration for having made those discounts, that they're going to get the payments that they're owed.
I'm speaking with Emily Murphy. She's Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator. So, Emily, there's a lot of uncertainty that'll play out over the next week and perhaps into early October with a potential shutdown. But there are some other acquisition rules and processes and timelines that are moving into October. So let's take first the FAR threshold increase that goes into effect 1 October.
1 October. And it's an exciting one because it's the inflation adjustment that's been required to go into place. They're supposed to review all the thresholds every 5 years. And so you're seeing the micro purchase threshold go from 10,000 to 15,000. That's a 50% increase. It's a pretty substantial increase. You're seeing the simplified acquisition threshold go from 250,000 to $350,000, which is itself a pretty big increase. But then you're also seeing the simplified acquisition procedures threshold go up from 7.5 million to 9 million. You're seeing the thresholds for pre-award notices, those are staying at $25,000. Justifications for other than full and open competition goes up to 900,000. So you're seeing a lot of inflation adjustments. And at the same time, if you're tracking the House version of the NDAA, you're seeing some additional increases that could be coming, on the heels of these. So it's interesting. We were just talking about this tension, all the new oversight. We're also, though, seeing both legislatively and regulatorily an emphasis to streamline processes and make things faster and make them easier.
This does seem like it will give contracting officials much more flexibility and speed in these kinds of procurements.
It will. And it also, this is important to note that this right now, the simplified acquisition threshold at $250,000 is also the small business reserve. So when that goes to $350,000, it means that everything under $350,000 is supposed to be set aside for small business unless it's being awarded through a multiple award contract. So that also is an increase in the dollars that should be going to small business and small contracts, but it's a substantial amount of work.
Well, let's switch gears a little to the revolutionary FAR overhaul. They continue to roll out pieces of this towards an October target. What's the latest news there?
So we've had some additional parts come out, but one that I'd like to revisit with you is Part 8, because we talked about this last month, and it was really exciting then. But there's been some changes that have been made, and those are still exciting, but they're maybe not as clear right now. So if you remember when we talked last month, Terry, the Part 8 said that the order of priority for using contract vehicles, it elevated the best-in-class or BIC contracts. And it was a really clear signal that these best-in-class contracts were going to be the preferred contract vehicles the government had. But then at the very end of August, there was another change made to Part 8, and that reference to best-in-class contracts came out. And it was replaced with the concept that the Office of Federal Procurement Policy was going to designate some contracts as mandatory contracts. But if you remember also the big contracts when they'd been in the FAR, if an agency chose not to use them, they had to get the head of the agency to sign off on it. But if an agency chooses instead to not use one of the OFPP designated contracts, it only has to be signed off on by the head of contract activity. And there's a lot of confusion as to what's happening and why it's happening. And one theory I've heard is that this is going to be a way for them to really promote the use of the OneGov contracts and to try and funnel some demand, because it was very possible that you could find the same offerings on multiple best-in-class contracts. And so it didn't give you the way to really leverage the government's demand signals to get the best pricing. So by having OFPP take this role, maybe we're going to be able to do that. It'll be really fascinating to see what signals and what standards OFPP puts in place for what these mandatory contracts are going to be.
So what will you be watching for on that front?
So OFPP had already said it was going to come out with a new definition of best in class. But I'm going to be really curious to see what they say the mandatory contracts are. Are they going to say that, it's a required use contract to use a OneGov contract? Is it a required use to use the schedules, or is it some subset of BIC contracts? Are there contracts that are not currently BICs? Are things like commercial platforms program, did those become best-in-class contracts? Because that gives a lot more insight into what's happening at the micro purchase level and below. What contracts are those? Is it things like the travel contracts that are already considered pretty much mandatory use contracts? So it's OFPP signaling that there's going to be a shift in the definitions, and hopefully it's going to be towards a results-based contract, pricing, savings, meeting the various goals that the administration has. So trying to really leverage all of those and give a clearer signal to contracting officers as to which contracts they're supposed to use. And frankly, to vendors as to which contracts they need to be obtaining.
Emily, as we look forward into the next fiscal year, what additional changes to acquisition policy or procedures are you expecting to hear from the Trump administration?
So there are a few big things we're still waiting to hear about. We're still waiting for Part 15 and 16 of the FAR and Part 19 of the FAR. And those are the three that I'm really, holding my breath, waiting to see what they come out with. Because I don't know back when the last time they did a major rewrite of Part 15, it was a multi-year process. So this is a chance to do things. The new CAS regulations, the cost accounting standards that came out of OFPP this month also are pretty exciting because it's really signaling that they're serious about commercialization. And then we've got the implementation of how this is going to happen. We're expecting in November that there's going to be a real request for comments on all of these FAR changes. But also you've got, GSA has announced that it's set up its Office of Centralized Acquisition Solutions, OCAS. And they put Tom Myron in charge of it. He's building out his team. They're looking at how they're going to deliver the services there now. And that's going to be interesting to watch, especially in the first quarter, how that launches and how GSA provides those services.
The devil will be in the details for sure.
There's so much opportunity in it, but there is a lot of work ahead of everyone.
I've been speaking with Emily Murphy. She's Senior Fellow at the George Mason University Baroni Center for Government Contracting and former GSA Administrator. Emily, always great to have you.
It's always wonderful, Terry. Thank you very much.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.